So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And as Beth has said, please enjoy your lunch, relax. We hope you'll learn some interesting information here. My name is Diane Rollman, and I'm a professor in the College of Public Health, and I'm also the director of the Healthier Workforce Center of the Midwest. And the Healthier Workforce Center of the Midwest is a federally funded center focused on promoting the health, safety, and well-being of workers. And we are really excited today to partner with our colleagues in the Tippie College of Business to bring this webinar to you. Last spring, we entered a situation which was unusual for all of us. And we realized that this is going to have a definite impact on individuals' health and well-being. And so we wanted to see what that impact was. And one of the things we did was we did a survey of University of Iowa employees and employees at Washington University in St. Louis to see what impact COVID had on their well-being. And we found some findings that I think will translate to other workplaces as well. Overall, we found that employees are having a decrease in overall well-being due to COVID-19. However, not surprisingly, our on-site clinical workers are reporting lower overall well-being than other industries. We also found that younger employees experience the worst health and well-being outcomes of any age groups. And this wasn't due to the fact that they were raising children, because only 14% had children. The other really important finding that we found was that leadership is critical during a crisis. And employees whose supervisors support their family roles report lower stress and well-being. Likewise, we found that supervisors who are working remotely but who are confident and empowering also report better well-being outcomes. And among the supervisors who were managing remote workers, there was a lot of well-being, a lot of anxiety and depression, and that were areas of concern. And higher anxiety among these supervisors was associated with some of the skills that they felt they were not having, delivering effective feedback remotely, checking in with employees remotely, or properly setting expectations. So our goal today really was to address some of those concerns. And to do that, we reached out to our all-star line of panelists here and invited them to share some of the experience that they've been having during this time and managing remote supervisors. So I'd like to introduce them briefly. We have Matt Finnegan from Berkshire Hathaway Energy Pipeline Group, Richard Thomas from Speedway Motors, Susan Walter from Walters Kluwer, and Adrian Wheeler from H&I Corporation. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Amy Christoph Brown to let her have a few opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Diane. Thank you for joining us today. This is a tremendous opportunity for the Tippie College of Business to be able to interact with all of you and also all of the fantastic panelists who are here today. We in the Tippie College run an alumni webinar series where we run about one event a month. Our next panelist or our next presenter who's coming up is on November 4th, and that's Dr. Richard Peter talking about benefit selections. So that is something, if you're interested, please let us know. Barb Thomas, our Executive Director of Communications, is attending today, and she can certainly get you an invitation to that if you're not already on our alumni list. We are very, very excited to have Dr. Beth Livingston representing us here today. Beth joined us 3 years ago after coming from Cornell University. She does research on topics of gender discrimination and work-family conflict. She has fabulous new work on sisterhood, which has been really interesting about women supporting women. And she is our go-to expert on everything that has to do with sort of managing work and family and how they intermix with each other, either gently or not so gently. So she's a perfect person to guide us through this panel today. And so I'd like to introduce Beth Livingston, turn it over to her, and she will be your guide to the panel today. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your giving us some time out of your day, and we hope that this is helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm excited to join you all here today. We are going to have a great panel, a lively panel, and I'm going to get into our panelists as soon as possible. Just as an aside up front, please remember you guys can interact in chat. We are going to start out by talking through some of the questions you all submitted in your registration. And we use that to plan this webinar to be able to be as effective as possible for as many people as possible. But we also want you to feel free to communicate with us things that come up during the course of the webinar. Please feel free to share with us in chat. It will go default to attendees if you want, or to panelists. If you want attendees and panelists to see it, you'll need to toggle that on the little blue box that you see. And we'll be following that throughout the course of the webinar, and we'll use the last 15 minutes to directly address your questions. So please feel free to add any of your questions or comments that you have. And we're also using that information to address things after the fact if we can't get to it today for future webinars. I'll say this. I really have appreciated working with both Dean Christoph Brown and Diane with the Healthier Workforce Center, because it's really been an opportunity for me in the business school to be able to think about total worker health and employee well-being in different ways. And I'm really excited about this panel for that reason, because we really were thrown into a very unique situation, not just for business performance, but also for employee well-being and manager well-being. And this is an opportunity, I think, to talk about those issues in a candid way. And hopefully you guys will leave this webinar both with things you can do immediately, things you could put into place tomorrow for your meetings, but also things you can sit and chew on a little bit and think about in a little more depth as you continue to figure out how to adapt to this new normal that we have been faced with in the midst of a pandemic and everything else that's been going on. So when you all submitted the sort of pre-registration questions, we coded those to get a sense for the overall themes that we thought were most important to cover in today's webinar. And there were some pretty strong themes that came out for those of you who registered and put some questions in that registration. And so I want to talk a little bit about those themes, and then we're going to cover those in our questions that we get to here in a moment. So a lot of folks asked about engagement. How do you engage workers when they're remote or perhaps dispersed? So you have some people who are remote and some aren't. How do you connect with them? How do you hold people accountable or do performance management issues, manage those things in the midst of a pandemic when you can't see people in the same way that you could otherwise? How do you figure out what the warning signs are that someone's struggling or stressed out if the normal things you would use as warning signs aren't always available to you? And then also another thing that came up was how you deal with hybrid teams. How do you deal with people? Some people are in site, some people aren't. Some people are on site 2 days, some people are on site 3. How do you manage these issues and what ideas might we be able to give you about those things? So I appreciate all of my panelists being here today. I'm going to get straight to your voice because that's why everybody's here, is to listen to you. And I'm going to ask you all the first question. I'm going to go around the panel and have you all respond, and then we'll move on from there. So the first question is very specific. Can you give us some examples of how you have engaged remote or hybrid staff during this time? And Matt, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So to me, it's the same concept, of course, as when you have people in the office, which is you got to get to know your employees. I personally relate a lot of things to sports, and I saw a good quote this last week that said, "You'll never be able to motivate a player that you don't know." And asking the player how practice went today is not getting to know them. Same concept here. So, getting around, it's tough for people, for managers sometimes, as busy as you are, to get around and talk to people, but it's something you have to do whether they're remote or not. Now that they're remote, again, you have to make an effort to get to contact them. And some people like to hear better on the phone. Some people like IM. So you have to use various channels, and you have to be open to how frequently they want to talk to you as well. Some of my employees I talk to multiple times daily. Others it's once a week. And then another thing I'll add is it can't just be talking to them when something goes wrong, or they're never going to want to take your call, right? So get to know them, ask about things outside of work, inside of work, sports, kids, get to know them, because it builds trust. And then when you get to a point where you have to deal with the things that go wrong in business, and they do, it's a lot easier to talk about.
Awesome. Thanks. Adrian, do you have thoughts on engaging?
Sure. Yeah. So I work for H&I Corporation. We have about 4,000 employees here in Muscatine, so pretty large numbers. And one of the things that we recognized right away when we started to have people working from home way more than our normal amount was this kind of the same thing Matt just said. Communication was key. And it was transparent communication was very important. Again, we think that the transparent communication helps build that trust, but also frequent communication and trying to figure out how frequently we needed to communicate with our employees, whether that was, large full, employee communications or those manager touch points one-on-one with their individual employees. So transparent communication in a really timely manner was how we really started to engage people right out of the gate.
Richard, did you have similar experiences? Different?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. So we have a hybrid model we've been doing here at Speedway since March. We've got over 500 employees spread around a couple states, but the main part of our workforce is here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So what we did immediately was the people that could work from home are working from home and have been, and then the folks that work in our warehouse and manufacturing are out on the floor. What we've tried to do here is incorporate some of the things that I've seen work in the past. Full disclosure, before coming here, I spent 31 years in the Navy. So from day one, going back in the 80s, before the days of emails and instant communication, I've experienced being led remotely and leading remotely, and up through my career, have had a workforce of people in the numbers of hundreds of thousands that I've had to manage or supervise all around the world. So it does go to that communication, knowing your people. I like what you said about the family well-being. I found that that's critical in the Navy, that you can only ask people to do so much, but if they have a family concern, that's gonna drive what they do. So you got to make sure that you're taking into account their family. Do they have a sick child or a sick mother, father? And that's what we've tried to do here at Speedway, is incorporate that and get into a routine of making sure that the managers are, keeping track of their people and what are their needs, and then getting it up to the ownership. We're very lucky that our owners, understand that our employees are our biggest asset. So getting the big concerns up and then getting them addressed in a timely fashion.
Susan, thoughts?
Hi, good morning. Similar thoughts to what everyone has shared. The company that I work for has about 14,000 employees internationally, and we were about 20% remote prior to COVID, and then over a weekend, the whole US team, 94% of us went to remote. I have been a remote manager for a very long time, so hopefully I was able to help my peers. Our division went to a morning meeting with all people leaders, and some of that was for the management team to communicate to us what was going on, but a lot of it was information sharing. And so people were sharing the different things they were doing with their teams to improve engagement or to make sure that people were being taken care of. So that was a really good way for us to share ideas, especially for those managers who had never had an experience with managing remote before. We rely really heavily on Teams, and that has been key to communication. My team is on Teams chatting with each other all day long, which has really helped. And we also relied on Yammer quite a bit to drive engagement. So a couple technology things that we have really increased our use of since COVID, and I think we will continue to use post-COVID, whatever that looks like.
So I think this is interesting because we have sort of, Susan, your group being kind of 94% remote and you having more experience even pre-COVID with being able to do this. Did you find that you were able to translate a lot of your pre-COVID experience? Were you able to share that with folks who are going newly online? Or was it different all around?
I hope so. There's the different component that COVID changed all of our lives on a personal level, and our home life changed so much. So that was something I had to navigate that was different. All of my team, about a third of my team is also remote. The rest of my team is office co-located together. And they all worked remote every once in a while. But one of the things that I have found with that team is that they are much closer now that they're all remote. And most of them are going to stay remote even post-COVID. So I don't think I really answered your question, but that is one of the things that we found that's been kind of a benefit, if there is one, to this.
No, I think that's a good point, because there are trends that accelerate, right? That I think, you realize, oh, I can do this in different ways. But I do think you brought up something interesting there with the idea that squares with what Richard was saying, which is, you have to think about, like, this situation is combined. It's not just people saying, oh, I would like to work from home. Can I work from home? And then you set them up and everything goes on as normal. but this is paired with a lot of holistic issues, right, that are affecting people and their wellness and well-being. And I think being in tune with that, and Matt, all of you guys kind of saying, getting to know people on a deep level so you can tailor your management to what they need in that moment. I think we as leadership researchers would say that's important all the time, but I think it's particularly important in a crisis like this, right? How do I think, some people, might want a meeting every day or multiple times a day, right? And some people that might really turn them off and feel very micromanaging. So I like the idea of sort of, it's a lot of work, but I think it would pay dividends in terms of being able to be effective. Speaking of the micromanaging, this is a comment that came up in the in our pre-questions, which is I think there's an acknowledgement among a lot of our attendees that I need to do frequent communications. I need to check in a lot, but I also don't want to feel micromanaging, right? I don't want to feel like I'm trying to, do that. I think there's always that tension, but I do need to monitor and hold people accountable for performance. And that's tension, I think, in this time, right? To try to figure out how to manage that. And so I would love to hear some of your guys' thoughts on how you have navigated that essential tension, which I think exists when we're all co-located, but is really, really more difficult now that we're having to manage this all remotely or partially remotely, and some people not, which could be even more difficult, I think. So, I would love to hear, Richard, I know you kind of have different sorts of people in different places based on what their job types are. If you have had things spill over in terms of, how you're managing people or, because those are naturally very different methods, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the challenge we have is keeping both sides happy and in tune, because there's the perception of the folks that are here every day because you can't pack a box from your house or you can't build a race car from your house. But those people, will often perceive that they're not getting a good deal of sitting at home working. So you have to explain to them that, well, the different job types, the person that can do all their stuff online, whether they're doing it sitting in an office here or sitting at home, they're able to be productive, and that the key is we're trying to keep everybody safe and keep the business running. So we're trying to keep the folks that have to be on site healthy so that the money comes in, everybody can get paid. So I think we've tried to explain that, of course, there's always going to be a little bit of that, us and them, but try to keep the teamwork and make each side understand that that they're valued and whatever we got to do to keep them most productive. And messaging sometimes is slightly different. Obviously here, I can walk out and I can talk to people in the warehouse, pretty easily. And I do that often. I just walk through and get the pulse. It's a little trickier with people at home. You got to find the other interactions, but that is a good point. It's a good balance because, people on each side of that spectrum see things differently. So trying to make sure that they feel that value, that they're showing that, hey, we're trying to accommodate each of them, whether it's, the needs of the people at home still have to deal with, kids that are remote learning. Well, so do the people that have to come to work. They have the additional challenge of, well, I can't stay home with my kid because I have to be in the building. So we've done some flex scheduling, try to accommodate. Somebody says, hey, I got to go pick up my kids. Hey, great, come in earlier, go home later. So it's a balance. And then we also have probably a third of our workforce is salaried and 2/3 hourly. So a big difference there in terms of the hourly people. For the most part, if you're not here, you're not getting paid. Salary, little different. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and it's taught me a little bit different because again, in the military, everybody gets paid all the time. So that's been an additional element that we've had to factor in and remind people that each person's in a unique position, and you got to almost look at each department and each individual and figure out how to best accommodate them. Oh, by the way, keep production up, because our business is still up 40 to 50% year over year is what we saw last year pre-pandemic, which is interesting. We wouldn't have predicted that. So we've got a much increased volume of work we're trying to keep up with. So
I think, it's interesting as someone who studied work and family for a long time. There's always been this tension. I've given talks to people in a very similar industry that you're in, Richard, that talks about, well, how do you talk about flex time and flex place, which is remote work, when you have shifts and you have a factory floor? Like, how do you have those conversations? And, it's often been pre-pandemic, very reticent to even like discuss how that might be able to be made fair. And I think you bring up a really good point, which is, fairness is, a lot of it's in messaging, like how you have these conversations, because it's not like people who work on the factory floor don't know they have to be there to pack the box, right? Like they know that that's a possibility. And so, having those conversations in an honest way, it kind of dovetails on what you guys were saying. And I know, Matt, you've had some experience with this idea of how do you monitor, how do you manage this sort of without micromanaging? Would you like to share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, the micromanaging part is something we had to tackle before the pandemic, and we just due to the culture of the organization, highly have a lot of engineers in our organization, a lot of project work, and so we tend to be left-brained and we tend to dig into the details like that. And so what we tried to do, I'm going to give you a kind of a three-part answer. First is develop the culture, and mine's talking about how do you draw that line between engagement and micromanagement. So for developing the culture, we took it back to even the interviewing stage and the new hire orientation stage of talking about the way that we manage and what the expectations are, and equating it to real life stuff. So again, back to sports. If I'm an NFL team, I'm watching game tape every Monday, and it stinks when I'm the guy making the mistake on game tape. But if I don't do that, we're not going to become better as an organization. So it's just kind of a basic requirement. So if somebody gets here and gets through interviewing and new hire orientation and doesn't know that's part of the culture, shame on us. But we try to develop that as kind of a screening tool. With regard to remote working, we added that. That was one of the first things we did. Added it to our teleworking policy to say just a section, and it's a whole 2 pages of teleworking policy. But we added a section on productivity expectations while teleworking. So again, employees know they're going to get asked for some reporting of what we're doing. The second part of this answer, I'd say, is just be predictable as a manager. So, and it's different for every manager, but for me, I'm going to ask my employees every week, what are your priorities this week? What are your priorities next week? What are the issues and concerns that you have? It doesn't have to be those 3 things that you're asking them, but my employees know they're going to get those questions when I talk to them, and it's so that I can identify what the risks are in projects. And then they're going to be asked to report on, okay, what you get done versus what you thought your priorities were. Not difficult questions. And again, it doesn't have to be the same for every manager, but I think from an employee's perspective, knowing what's coming, that predictability helps in terms of not considering it micromanaging. And then lastly, try to manage the outcomes and not the process. So if we're getting the right answer and we're getting success on projects and we're hitting all of our metrics, I don't necessarily have to manage the process, how they get there as closely. Now, when the outcomes aren't there, then you have to drill down and jump into the process. But that's where people, I think, also feel that there's micromanagement when you have a good outcome and somebody's digging into, well, how are you doing it, right? So manage the outcomes and not the process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There were some questions. I'm over here looking because I have my chat box open in this other screen. And, and there was a question there. I think that's really good. That was saying, how do you actively manage productivity, right? This is a different sort of, you still have to make money. Like Rich was like, we still have to produce, we still have to do these things, right? If anybody wants to get paid, like we still have to do these tasks, and managing productivity is very different. And so I like the idea that you guys that you're asking those questions. I think those are good check-in questions, with your employees, and thinking about outcomes versus processes. That's a really fundamental sort of thing. And it's a switch, right? As managers, we have to switch the way we think and maybe the way we even manage, because we might be used to, I know what the triggers are. I know if I see somebody making this mistake in process, I know it's going to happen. But if they're not in front of you, you have to figure out different ways to identify and diagnose what might be going wrong. And I will say the risk of this, and I saw a survey coming out, and I'll post it at the end. I'll find it and post it. I read a study that had come out that surveyed people who are working remotely now, and who said if their companies use the same monitoring methods as they do when they're in work, that 42% of them would be more likely to quit. That it doesn't feel the same, like if you're using those same, screen tracking, login sorts of things when you're at home, because it just feels strange when I'm at my house and how you're managing. And so we do have to, I think about the private public sphere and how we perceive it and how our employees perceive it. And so I think your method there is a nice option at sort of addressing that by saying, okay, how can I break this down to what are your specific goals? Are you achieving them? And then how do I know you've achieved them? Like, what's the outcome I'm looking for? And not worry about the process unless that outcome, is becoming a problem. And then we can, because then I have an excuse, right? Then I can say, okay, this hasn't happened. Let's talk about process instead of assuming that it won't, right?
Yep.
That's interesting. Susan, do you have stuff to add about this idea of how you're connecting or without micromanaging?
I set the expectation very early on with my team prior to the pandemic that I was going to check in often because I'm not at the water cooler. So they already expected that from me. The situation I'm in is the bulk of my team are software testers, and every 2 weeks we deliver code and we know what we have to deliver and everybody has assignments. And so it's a little bit easier to monitor because there's certain deadlines that have to be met, and there's a lot of numbers around it. And so that part of it has not been that difficult, just by the nature of our work. So I've been lucky there.
I think that's good to know. And I want to move, we have some really good questions here about that. And I want to move on to our next question, but feel free in chat if you guys have more on that you'd like us to address, feel free to put those in chat. But I want to move on to the next question because it is relevant to some of the things that are coming up, which is about wellness and well-being and stress. And how do you know, what are the warning signs with your employees, but also think what are the warning signs with yourself? And Adrian, I know you guys have been doing some really interesting stuff about stress and well-being. And I think this is a really important way to link this back to this holistic well-being part of it. And so I'd love if you would share. So the question here that we're asking is really, how do you figure out the warning signs in your employees, right? That things are not going well if you can't see them every day. But also maybe how you check in with yourself, because again, one of the interesting things about this population of remote managers is many of us are not only managing people remotely, but we're also being managed remotely, right? Or our goals are at such a high strategic level that we are dealing with our normal levels of stress, but added on with all of this personal stuff. And so we want to make sure that we're not just ignoring the manager's well-being in this. And I would love to hear what some of you, what you guys are doing.
Sure. I think from a warning sign standpoint, and I guess I can share from my perspective, I'm managing a team, but I'm also in HR. So helping provide solutions to our entire organization from an HR standpoint. So, I think it's simple things like paying attention to people's responsiveness. Are people turning their cameras on? Do they seem kind of aloof or disengaged? Obviously simple things like not getting their work done on time. And when you see those types of things from an individual, you really have to dig in and try to open yourself up to communication, talk, see what's going on. And are there any roadblocks that you need to help that person remove so that they can, get back engaged with the team, get their camera on, things like that. One thing I will share that our organization did, we realized quickly that we had tons of managers in our organization managing in a new normal, right, with remote work. So we pivoted quickly our normal training routine and started to deliver a lot of virtual content on topics like leading with empathy and making sure that the softer side of leadership and management was something that our leaders felt equipped to be able to do. And we came up with a bunch of topics right out of the gate that we could share with those leaders to help them look for those signs and address those things with their employees quickly. So we used resources that were free, that we found, through online, and then kind of researched content and came up with our own content. So we didn't have to make a huge investment, using things like the Brene Brown empathy video, a lot of Cy Wakeman's content around accountability, caring for people while holding them accountable, things like that. So that was one of the great solutions we came up with that was really helpful.
I love that. I love that idea, that leading with empathy thing. This is a time where I think we can all use a lot of empathy with what we're going through at this point in time. Susan, do you have thoughts on that in terms of warning signs for yourself or others?
Yeah, I had a couple of people that I couldn't get off the phone, and I realized that they were probably feeling pretty lonely. So I checked in with them via phone a lot more than some of the other people that work on my team. I'm in Arizona and most of my team is in Minnesota. So I'm able to see when they're starting to work later and later. And I often check in with them, what's going on. Same thing, people that are being aloof, not engaging in discussions that they normally would engage in. I've got a team of really heavy introverts. And so sometimes it's hard to pry out of them what's going on, but it's really, it goes back to what we talked about at the top. It's having a relationship with your employees, knowing them and having trust with them, that they can come to you and say, my kids are home, I've got to work a different schedule, or I'm not going to be able to make commitments. I helped one woman, we researched what would it take for her to go part-time. So finding solutions that they can feel supported, and so that the business can continue. And that you've got to strike that balance, but people understand that. It's at least in my experience. The one thing that I tended to be within our management team was the squeaky wheel that reminded everybody that not everybody had a family, because we were focusing so much on balancing work and family. And we have a lot of people who are single or empty nesters, and we weren't really paying attention to what their needs might be. And so to Adrian's point, we rolled out some training, and then so we did find some training about how do you help people who aren't juggling a million things, but they're dealing with more loneliness than their peers who have 50 kids at home with them.
I think that's interesting because as Diane said at the beginning, with our work with the Healthier Workforce Center, is we did find that at the University of Iowa, it was that youngest tier of employees from age 20 to 29 who were struggling the most. And it wasn't explained by their childcare burdens. There's actually a report in APA that came out, the American Psychological Association, that came out that confirmed that younger people are really struggling. And a lot of it is due to that loneliness and that connection. There's a comment in chat here that says, underperforming may be a sign of stress, but so is overperforming. And when you have, none of these other things that are your hobbies, you normally go with, your friends, your routine you normally do, and you just start working all the time, that's not necessarily good for you either. And, I like the idea that you were saying there, but you're using data that's available to you and the sort of time they're working and when they're working to serve as a signal. And when we had another webinar before, one of the panelists said something I thought was really interesting, which was he looked at the vacation use and found that vacation use was down so very, very much because where are people going to go, right? In terms of people going. But he noticed that and said, okay, but this could be the harbinger of something not very good to come down the line, and use that as a signal. So I really like the idea of saying, well, what data do we have available to us, and how can we use that to help us signal before it gets to a bad point? Matt, Richard, do you have things to add to that about warning signs?
I've got a few points. So one of them is on communications. We found we try and send out communication updates on a lot of things during COVID, whether it's case counts or different things that we're doing. But we also found that it's probably our bottleneck in this whole thing is communications, because you tend to forget about it. And then, so at our officer meeting, we try and have a trigger to ask, is there something new we need to communicate? Is there a different mechanism through which we need to communicate it to get those resources out? And part of that's EAP resources or different things like that, or just addressing head on the struggles that people are having. Two, back to getting to know your employees and just knowing the tone of what they're saying. So you have to listen to your different employees and know what things affect them more or less. I've had one that, back to your comment on being connected, that I could tell felt like he wasn't in on things anymore. And so there's some things where I've just given him assignments that I would normally do myself, but I know he can do very well. And it gives him a sense of being connected not only to the organization, but to me, and he's able to get them done. But some employees feel like they're missing out on opportunities. I happen to be in the office, and I have been. And so there's probably, it varies, but say 50 to 75% of our employees are in the office. So some of the employees that are not, for whatever reason that they're not able to be here, feel like they're missing out on being connected to either good projects, the personnel that are here, et cetera. So being able to find things that give them that sense of connectedness has helped us out.
I think you're bringing up so many good points, and I'm like trying to connect them all because, you've got the idea of there being different sort of family structures that we might not know about, right? Elder care responsibilities, or don't have children at home, but have, hobbies and friends, which are incredibly important and feeling disconnected from. But you're also bringing up something really interesting here, which is the fact that, in the midst of all of this, people still care about their careers, and they're very well aware when they might be missing out on something that might have ramifications for them later. And I do think there are concerns about that, particularly, I mean, we all have people who are very ambitious on our teams, for instance, who have charted out what their career path should be. And then now, boom, huge interruption. And what is this going to look like, right? Like, I know I need to be in line management. I know I need to check these boxes, or I need to have international experience. And now that is moot. So like, there's all of these different things I think that we as managers have to rethink how we're evaluating people, what we're evaluating, and how we counsel them about their career paths, which I envision is probably a big thing that's affecting some of these young folks too, which is, here's my best laid plans. They're all, messed up. And so, one of the commenters brought up here, which I think is really, really interesting. And I see, Adrian, that you responded, which is, have you shared your own personal experiences? Like, how have you tried to connect on that level with your employees? And Adrian, would you like to share? I see you posted that.
Sure. I'm a mom. I have 2 little kids. So when this all, happened back in March, it was actually the week that we were all on spring break. So we were all home anyways. And then just nobody went back anywhere. So trying to figure out how I was going to manage my own team remotely, and what I was going to do with my kids. My husband was all of a sudden home. It was very stressful. And actually we had just moved into a new house. So there was just a lot going on for me personally. I believe in transparency. I believe transparency builds trust. So I have a team that had, other parents on the team. I had, single people on my team. So everybody was kind of dealing with their own stuff. And so I, again, just tried to really manage the individual and share my personal experiences. Hey, I'm not going to be able to check in as much today, or this week I've got a lot going on because the kids are home, and just really trying to be transparent about what I was dealing with, but also sharing, the positive and the negative of what I was experiencing, and making sure that they knew they could talk to me about what was going on with them too.
You bring up a good point here, which I'd like to transition to, which is our last question, and then we'll, that I want all the panelists to talk about, and then we'll move to some more questions that have been submitted in chat, because it's different now, right? Like the beginning of the pandemic, we're all looking back and kind of laughing at, those early days, right? When things were different. And, maybe there's sort of that rally around the flag effect at the beginning. We're all in a crisis. We're all in it together. We'll rally. We'll figure it out. We're in an emergency. We will adapt, and we will be agile, and we will figure it out. And now we are 8 months in, and the pressures are still there. The end is not in sight, right? There are all of these other things that are coming up. And I would love to just ask all of you guys to comment on, how are you remaining connected? Like, how are you managing this? Because it's different now, I think. Like, it feels different to me. Maybe you don't feel the same. And so I'd love to hear that too, but it does feel different than those early days. I almost felt there was like I remember posting things like day 10 of isolation, we can do it. And now I'm like, I don't know what day it is. I have no idea what time, right? And so I do think that is something real that we're managing. And I would love to start with you, Richard, if we could, about that sort of feeling that you're dealing with.
Yeah, it reminds me of leaving on a ship for what we thought was a short duration cruise and coming back 10 months later. It's kind of that Groundhog's Day feeling. I heard a term, I think it was pandemic fatigue or COVID fatigue. I think we're in the cycle now where it's more important than ever to communicate. So we've been trying to do is just reiterate that, hey, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's how things have changed, because I personally don't see an end in sight for what we're going through. In Nebraska, unfortunately, I think we're in the top 5 for positive COVID cases. So we're not nowhere close to being over this. So I think, this is still going to go on for months. So we're trying to figure out how to keep people engaged, keep them motivated, keep them positive, and say, okay, yeah, you got to wear a mask, but here's a positive, keeping people healthy, keeping people at work, keeping them engaged, again, keeping in sight some of the important stuff that, although we're doing things different. There's some things we probably will continue. There's probably some of our workforce that won't come in the office very often, maybe once in a while for, that rebaselining. But I think that's the tough part now, is that continuation. Again, how do you keep people motivated? Because everybody, like you said, first week or two, like us, is going to be over by the end of the summer. Well, we're almost at, we're getting close to the end of the year and we're still doing it. And I don't see it breaking anytime soon, really. So that's kind of the tough part, is just, again, keep that engagement, try to keep it positive, find ways to interject or boost people, little things. Like we actually created kind of this, a t-shirt or something, that just something simple that you can give people, kind of say, hey, we're all in this together.
I love that. And, one of our professors in Tippie College of Business named Michelle Williams, she always talks about the importance of leaders engaging in sense making, like helping your employees make sense of things. And I love that, because that feels like sense making to me. Let's make this make sense and interpret this in a way that has some positivity to it, which I think is a really, she argues that it's kind of one of the most overlooked roles of leaders, right? That this sense making that you can provide. And so I really love that you're doing that. Susan, do you have thoughts on how you're navigating the COVID fatigue?
Slowly but surely, some of the things that we suspended at the beginning, we are reintroducing to try to make things feel more normal, feel like a more normal October, November. And to some extent, I think that's working. We have an annual survey that they talked about. Maybe we won't do it this year. And we decided we do it annually. Why would we not do it this year? We just rolled out flex work, which people are going to have the option to work from home, part-time, full-time, change their hours. And I think that's in direct response to, this may go on for a while. So let's let people decide it's what they want to do, not what they're being forced to do. So I think, and at the same time, understanding that it is still not back to normal. And I've got a team in Minnesota, they started school again, and now they're shutting down again. So we're back to where we were in March, and just navigating it through, knowing that we still are not back to normal. And so if they need flexibility, we're still going to provide flexibility. So it's kind of that balance of, this is normal, but if it's not normal, let's figure out how to cope with it. Just remaining flexible, I think, is really the key. And we had a big product that we launched this summer, a financial services company, so the Paycheck Protection Program, and that was a huge rally around. And we got testimonials from businesses that stayed in business and whole towns that stayed in business because of PPP, and how we contributed to that huge rallying cry. That's done. And you can start to see people's energy starting to flag a little bit. So it's like, what's the next big thing we can rally people around? Or is it we just rally around, hey, work is kind of back to normal, and so let's relish the fact that we're not working weekends and late into the night to deliver something.
I love that. I was on a meeting the other day with a number of other female faculty, and it was led by our interim dean, who you met at the beginning of this, Amy Christoph Brown. And we all went around and we were sharing wins, like things that had happened that were positive. And it was so wonderful for me, just like all of these positive things that had happened in the midst of everything that's been going on. And it was so I imagine that sort of feeling ownership of something good can just seep into you, because I think sharing joy is definitely something that, sharing wins. What are some wins that we can share with one another as a team? So I love that that's something that brought you guys together over the summer. Matt, thoughts on staying connected?
Maybe a couple of thoughts that in addition to just being kind of a master of communication and all the various channels that you have to use, I think one thing we tend to do, or I've tended to do, you forget to say thank you for things that deserve a thank you. And everybody likes to hear a sincere thank you, not frivolous, but just probably one piece of advice is make sure that if you're thinking about things that you would normally, if they're in the office, say, hey, nice work on this. You take the opportunity not just to reach out to people, but to say thank you for even the small wins in the organization. Because again, every bit of that goes a long ways with employees and with motivation. And then the second part, just echoing Susan, I had several things listed under flexibility. I remember when we were first starting this, planning for the pandemic in the early stages, and the schools were doing various things. So some were remote, some were hybrid, and we were trying to draw up a perfect plan for that. And my wife is a teacher, and she said, Well, good luck with that, because they're going to change. And we're going to be 14 days in, and they're going to change from being completely in school to going to hybrid. And so that flexibility piece is big because, you know, work priorities change. Schools, again, whether they're remote or hybrid or whatever, that's going to change. Pandemic situation changes. We've seen, of course, a big uptick recently. So our last 4 weeks was probably 2.5 times as many cases as the prior 4 weeks. And this last week was even double of that. So that situation is going to change. And again, we just have to, as an organization and all of our organizations, remain flexible, because the things that come up there's no one right answer that's going to stay the test of time over months for employees. So when the situation changes, we have to have flexibility for our employees so we can continue to do business.
I love that. I definitely feel like there's that. We always talk, I feel like companies, we always talk about how agile our strategy is, right? Like how we're so agile, we're flexible, we can meet these needs. And now we're realizing how that applies to human resource strategy as well, right? Which I'm sure Adrian can speak a lot to as an HR person, right? Like how we don't often talk about the need for agility in those strategies too, but we're seeing it, right? And so Adrian, would you like to give final thoughts on this question before we ask some questions from chat?
Sure. I'll just share kind of one thing that I thought was really helpful in thinking about this and COVID fatigue and just how we were going to move people on, even if our situation hasn't changed. We listened to, a group of us at HNI listened to a Cy Wakeman podcast where she had 5 COVID tips for managers. And 2 of them I'll share that I thought were very helpful. One is that you have to call your team to greatness. So that, and what she meant by that is you really have to make sure that people are feeling accountable. And then the other was to connect them to meaningful work. So, you know, you could have someone working at home and maybe they think what they're doing isn't as, you know, exciting or strategic as what they were doing in the office, because it's more of an individual contributor type task. But that's probably still something that's super meaningful and is going to help a bigger project down the road. So I think connecting your employees to make sure that they feel important and that their work is meaningful is another way to keep them very engaged.
I love that. And it dovetails with one of the questions in chat. So I'll start moving to some of those questions that have come up because, you know, there's the idea that, you know, there's this fundamental idea of fairness. I think that what you described can contribute to, which is now I'm working from home. And so I don't see how my piece fits with everybody else. And maybe that feels like I'm not going to have the same opportunities for my career. I may not be right. And so, you know, thinking about that, how have you guys are there any situations you can think of where you've dealt with something like that and how you've communicated with employees to make them see that meaningfulness?
Yeah, I personally experienced that. And right when everything kind of happened initially, wanted to get more involved in some other parts of our COVID crisis management that I wasn't involved in initially. So I just reached out to my boss and I said, hey, I want to learn more about what's going on over here because of the work I'm doing is on this side. So could I have some cross-functional projects, or could I get involved or sit through some calls or meetings with you so I can get more involved in what's going on over here? And he was very open to that. So I really just had to be kind of proactive and ask. But yeah, that's a personal experience I had.
Other people, you have experience with that? I think it's interesting because I think there are opportunities in this, right? There are positive opportunities in this that sometimes it's hard to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part of it, you're right, Adrian, just encouraging people to ask. So even outside of ourselves, encouraging people to ask, because so for us, there's been a lot of things that come up that have made it a very, very busy year. And so a lot of managers tend to get completely overloaded and sometimes tend to a fault, do things themselves. So there's areas that you can split off your work, and you've got people out there that are looking for something meaningful to do. It's marrying them up, and how do you get people to raise their hand to their own benefit and what they want to do.
Yeah. And I think that sense making for people, right? Seeing, you know, here's what you're doing and it's important and here's how it fits with the bigger whole, the bigger picture, that you have to sometimes actively do that for your employees because they might not see it, or you can't assume that they would see it, maybe is the right way to say it. But I also like the idea of thinking about, you know, as managers, we're often trying to protect our employees, right? Like, and not give them too much in the middle of this crisis. But I think it's also worth thinking that there are some people who are thinking of this could be an opportunity for me to grow, or an opportunity for me to be more authentically engaged in something I care about, And so I do think there are opportunities, and, if you could encourage folks to kind of opt into that would be great. There's some specific comments in here, two things that I thought brought up, and I think I'll put both of those questions out there and then let you guys speak to both as we're getting close on time. And I think they're both really, really interesting. The first is about some people are working in person and some people are not, right? And there's a difference there in terms of how that feels. And sometimes it's occupational, and you can say, oh, well, this person's doing a very different occupation than that person. There's a reason why. Other times, it feels, well, there's a comment here, a panelist said, well, how do you get around the idea that if I have to come in, it feels like my life doesn't matter as much. Like, I don't get that same safety. Alternatively, if folks come in, there might be, from the alternative direction, people who feel like, well, I'm doing you a favor by being here, right? Because there's all of this sort of frustration around. And I would love to see how you guys have navigated. Again, I feel like we're talking about tensions between opposing forces in a lot of these ways, but they matter. And these are the issues that I think our attendees are really trying to wrestle with. And so talking about that. And the other question was about how you do virtual onboarding. So I think either, do you want to tackle the tension question or the onboarding question? But I think allowing each of you guys to sort of weigh in there would be great. Maybe we can start. Anybody want to start, or should I ask? Yeah, Richard, for sure.
So the tensioning one, I kind of spoke to a little bit earlier, and it was interesting because I saw that before COVID, that, we kind of have it's kind of that wall. Like, if you're on the office side of the wall, or you're on the production side of the wall, it was kind of that, a little bit of a us versus them, because the perception of, well, I gotta stand here for 8 hours doing these tasks. Whereas, if you're up front in the office, the perception is they're doing different things, and vice versa. So trying to overcome that, we've been doing that anyway. And it's kind of a continuation of, how do you make sure that everybody understands their value from, ownership values everybody, but then also that, so people understand the different perspective that, if you're, fully in your office, or a web, or somebody that's been working from home, like new people who don't come in, how do you get that baseline so they can see what other people are doing and understand the differences and challenges? And that's a little tricky during COVID, because we don't want to have, everybody go to somebody else's workplace and hang out. Certainly we do after COVID, and that's kind of something we were looking at before is, okay, everybody from this office, you're going to spend a day in this area, and then vice versa. So you have people kind of transitioning and getting that feeling. And, that's some of the things we're going to try to do. It's a little tricky now because, again, we're trying to minimize the cross contact, but the tension is there. And again, I think, especially in our company here, we've seen it, and I saw it previously, even in the military. You always see that, kind of that it's different for them or for me, and trying to keep people so they don't think they're being treated unfairly or differently because of, who they are or what they're doing.
Yeah, thoughts, Matt or Susan, on either the onboarding question or that tension question?
Yeah, I did. Oh,
go ahead, Susan. Go ahead.
I don't have anybody that's in the office right now, but we do within our division. And a couple of the things that we did early on, and are continuing actually, making sure that there's food in the office. We're catering in lunch. They bring in once or twice a week, they're doing care packages, so people have food at the ready to take home and prepare. So some of that was born early on because of grocery store shortages, frankly. We also had a couple office buildings in our office park that closed, and so they brought pallets of toilet paper over for employees. So really making the employees who are in the office feel like we care, because we do, and make sure that what they need, we can help supply, and making a lot of the steps we're taking is to keep them safe. We actually had a lot of people who, when we started saying, okay, we're going to have half the team in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other half, people wanted to come in. We had a lot of people who did not want to work from home. Another thing that we did is we had some processes that were in the early stages of being automated. And so we really pushed that automation so that they could work from home. We have a printing business. We're not going to take printing presses and set them up in somebody's garage. So there will always be some people who are going to have to be in the office, but making sure that they feel taken care of. I've also heard from some of the people who are in the office is they're getting a ton of FaceTime with our executive management team because they're walking around and making sure that everybody's happy. And so I think they're feeling pretty cared for right now. I think we're lucky. We haven't had a lot of, I'm doing you a favor. In fact, we told everybody, if you are uncomfortable coming into the office, we will find something that you can do at home. Now, honestly, people can read into that and think, oh, I better go into the office. But that's, that seems to be the exception rather than the rule for us right now.
Do you have any final 30 seconds?
Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say, Matt, do you have any final 30 seconds that you want to add on that before we finish up on the stuff you guys have dealt with?
We haven't found a perfect answer for it. There's always that conversation for the people that are here. Why can't I work at home? And for the people and sometimes why am I being forced to come here if it's not safe? And our answer is the same. If you don't feel safe, you shouldn't be here. And we allow them that flexibility. But we also make sure that it is safe. And we've taken, as all companies have, a lot of precautions. So communicating what those things are to employees, and also that out of the cases that we have had at our organization, none of them have been from transmission in the office. So it's actually one of the safer places I think that you can be is here versus where a lot of people spend their time outside of here.
That's wonderful. That's great. And Adrian, I appreciate that you added the podcast in the chat and things like that. And I think, Adrian, did you have anything final to add on that as our final moment before we hop off?
No, we ended up doing a lot of the things that Susan was talking about. We have a large portion of our workforce is hourly as well in our 11 manufacturing facilities here in town. So they didn't have an option to work from home. So we did have a lot of celebrations. We did take home meals. So they had dinner when they got home. We made Member Strong shirts to kind of give that solidarity feel. Just lots of celebrations. And then we were really, really focused on safety. So making sure that our employees that were in the office had very strict safety protocol. We were very transparent about communicating that safety protocol, masks, social distancing. We moved jobs around so people felt safe and socially distant, even in a manufacturing work cell. So all those types of things.
Awesome. I love these thoughts, and we're about ready to finish up. I feel like we could do this forever, but I wanted to thank everybody for attending and pop it over to Diane to say goodbye. Muting. Yes. You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, it was hidden on my screens here. Thank you guys very much for attending this webinar. I hope you found some good tips here. I actually wrote down a couple of things, and I'm going to be talking to people. I'd love to have food to take home. I think that's a great solution. It's the little things I think that matter. I think what everybody wants to know is that they feel valued by their employer. So the more that we can show that value to them, even if it's a little thing, is important. But thank you, a big thank you to our panelists and also those of you who attended. We have a contact information for Beth and myself, and we will be putting this webinar up. There's a link here, but we'll also send out an email with a link to it. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Yes, thank you guys. Thanks to our panelists. Thank you so much. And thanks attendees. Great questions.